And I think good podcasts do that. They have something compelling about them that compels people to listen, like a new episode drops in your podcast player, and you might have 20 options to listen to. What jumps out at you? What is compelling? What episode title makes you think, oh, wow, I want to listen to that? And then shows like yours can also create a sense of community, can also create a sense of people like us do and think about things like this.
Hey, Bootstrappers! Welcome to Bootstrap Stories, the podcast where founders, marketers, and thoughtful leaders share the most actionable tips on building a successful business. After meeting with hundreds of bootstrappers in the past years, I figured out that we all struggle to grow our businesses. But the truth is that most of us don't know where to ask for help or advice. That's why I decided to start this podcast, to give you all the keys to succeed at every stage of your business. All the tested strategies for solving your struggles and taking your business to a new level. No fluff, no bullshit, only a real talk between friends that help each other succeed. Today, my guest for this episode is Justin Jackson, co-founder of Transistor FM. Justin, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Bonjour, comment ça va?
Ça va et toi? We're gonna stop there.
Ça va bien. Ouais, ça va bien. Yeah, I'm doing well. It's good. It's good to be hanging out.
Yeah, actually, it was fun speaking to you in French prior to the show.
Yeah, we could try to redo this whole interview. We'll do it once in English and then we'll redo it in French. And then you'll have two versions, right? I would imagine that there must be a pretty big entrepreneur scene in France.
Yeah, it's quite big, to be honest. Like especially in the last years, I think like SaaS, like software businesses, crypto businesses have kind of like boomed in the recent years.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, for Transistor, we use Krisp. Have you heard of them? Krisp Chat?
Yeah, I know them. I know them well.
And it is just incredible in terms of many things, but in terms of the amount of value they give in that product versus the price. Because that market, there's Intercom and other people, and it's just an unbelievable product. And yeah, they're all in France. They're just
very small team away. Actually. Yeah, it's like I think there are like 6 or 8 people. Like it's crazy.
Yeah, I love it because I love it when small teams produce really good software. Because I think it's possible, and the idea out there is that if you're a small team, then maybe your software is not going to be as good as a big team. But in the case of Krisp, it's better software. And it's for a better price than you can get, Intercom or any of those other alternatives. So yeah, that's interesting. So there is definitely more startup stuff happening in France these days.
Yeah, definitely.
That's cool.
And for people who are not aware of what Transistor.fm does, can you like give a bit of an intro? Like when did you got started? What's kind of like the numbers? How big is the team? How fast did you grow?
Sure. So Transistor.fm is podcast hosting and analytics. So every podcast, including this one, needs to be hosted somewhere. And it's different than YouTube. It's more like websites. If you want to host your own website, you have to sign up for Squarespace or Wix or something like that. And we do that hosting part. We're the CMS where you add your episodes, upload your audio files, publish to an RSS feed, and then we help you distribute it to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. And I started it with John Buda, who I'd met in 2014 at a festival, kind of a tech startup art festival called XOXO.
Gossip Girls.
And we'd been... What's that?
No, it's like in the TV series Gossip Girls, like they say always XOXO.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's shorthand for hugs and kisses. But but this conference was, it really was incredible. It was in Portland and had this really neat vibe. And we met there and had become friends and worked on a few projects over the years. And then when he was at Cards Against Humanity, he was working there. They wanted to launch a new podcast. And he said, you know what, I'm just going to build a little something that they can use to launch this podcast. And he was telling me about it. And I said, John, this is the project. This is the project that we got to work on together. And I'd like to say he like immediately said yes, but he's very thoughtful, and he doesn't do anything too quickly. And so he thought about it for 2-3 weeks and then got back to me, and we started working on it. We were talking about it in 2017, but then we signed our papers in early 2018 and started documenting our journey then too. So we started a podcast called Build Your SaaS, where we just from the beginning shared everything that we went through. So that was back in 2018, had no idea how it would turn out. Officially launched in August of that year. And then a year later, we were both full-time on Transistor.
Nice.
And then last year, in 2021, we hired 2 people. So we have 4 full-time people working on it. We have Helen in the UK, Jason in Ohio, John in Illinois, and then me here in British Columbia, Canada. And in terms of size, I mean, we are quite profitable. And John and I are both making more money than we've ever made in our lives. And we serve about, we're almost at 20,000 podcasts on Transistor.
Nice.
So a fair amount. So yeah, we feel so fortunate. It turned out, initially we said, if this could just replace the incomes we were making before, that would be a huge win. And even at the beginning, like if this could just, even if it was paying us less, for us to be able to run a small company the way that we want and have kind of the lifestyle we want, that would be just the dream. That would be incredible. And for it to have happened, we just feel so lucky. It's been really great.
Nice. And because you have like so many podcasts, I'm very curious, like to a bit understand, how exactly do you get started with a podcast? Like, what are like the tips you could give to someone who was hesitating whether or not they should start a podcast, and also how to grow a podcast?
I mean, people could certainly follow your lead. I think you've done a lot of things right so far.
Thanks.
So check out what you're doing. And I mean, even your onboarding, like you have this document it's very quick, which is great. It's like, here's the details. This is the time. You even have it in my time zone. Here's the Zoom link. Make sure you have a quiet place with your sound and your camera on. It's going to be a casual conversation. Here's some examples. And then we're going to chat about these things. That's perfect. So yeah, you're doing a lot of things right. The thing about starting a pod, no, I don't think you're doing anything wrong. The thing is, I mean, a lot of it depends on what you want to get out of it. So one of my first shows was a show similar to this. I had just moved to this small ski town in British Columbia from a bigger city. And I knew I wanted to stay connected to the tech industry and really try to connect with the best people in the world. And an interview show gave me that opportunity to reach out to people, have them on the show, have a conversation. And, a lot of it for me was building connections with people who I would know eventually, hearing their stories, and then also building a connection with an audience. And, there was some sponsorship and other things, but really those 3 things were what I wanted. And you kind of have to work back from that. If you want to be the next Joe Rogan, that's probably going to be quite difficult. And also, that's going to change a lot of the things you might do, if you wanted to have a show like that.
Yeah.
So determine what you want. And then the biggest thing that I think people forget is that it has to be interesting. it has to be compelling. There has to be a compelling promise that your show is delivering. So for Joe Rogan, the compelling promise is you're going to get all of these celebrity guests, and often Joe gets them to say or do something unexpected. And that's kind of the promise of the show. I'm going to listen because I might hear somebody that I like, a celebrity, do or say something that's unexpected. And that promise is compelling. It's what gets people to listen, and it's what gets people to talk about the show. And there's other jobs to be done there as well. I think if folks haven't looked into jobs to be done, it's a framework popularized by Clayton Christensen, who's a Harvard researcher. He has a book called Competing Against Luck. But the idea is that human beings often do things. When they do things, they are hiring that thing to do a job in their life. And if we stick with Joe Rogan, I'm not a huge fan of Rogan's show, but everyone knows it. If we stick with Rogan, another job to be done is it has a lot of men that listen to the show. And so I think one of the jobs to be done for that kind of person is they want to feel like they're a part of a group. They want to feel like people like us do things like this. People like us lift weights. People like us take these supplements. People like us
are bold.
are bold or whatever. Yeah. And so there's this sense of belonging that he's created. And I think good podcasts do that. They have something compelling about them that compels people to listen. Like a new episode drops in your podcast player, and you might have 20 options to listen to. What jumps out at you? What is compelling? What episode title makes you think, oh, wow, I want to listen to that? And then I think shows like yours can also create a sense of community, can also create a sense of people like us do and think about things like this, and having a connection with the listener who is maybe trying to build a company. Maybe they're in Europe and their people are looking for a European perspective on building a startup. And so all of those things can become part of what compels people to listen. And I think people don't think about that enough with podcasting. You want to create reasons for people to listen. You want to give people a reason to choose your episode first when it lands. And I think we can observe our own behavior in this way, but we can also reach out to people and ask them, hey, what was the last podcast episode you listened to and why? What stood out about it that made you listen? And really ask good questions about, what leads people to pick one episode over another. What was the last podcast you subscribed to and why? What compelled you to? There's a lot of friction with actually subscribing and, finding out the reasons that compels people to actually do something. That's what you want to figure out, and then add more of that into your show.
That's nice. And for people who get started, usually, they don't always know how to get started, get the first episode, etc. So what would be your advice for a beginner or, someone who is thinking that to create a podcast, they need to invest in, those fancy and very expensive equipments? Do you feel like it's needed, or do you feel like you can get started pretty simply?
I mean, you can definitely get that. Usually the first thing I tell people to do, if they've never spoken on a microphone before, is to take out their phone, go to the voicemails app, and then the voice memo app, and just start recording yourself by holding your phone to your face, mostly for the practice. See if you can string together something and talk about a topic, maybe even unscripted, for 3 minutes or 5 minutes or whatever. And do that frequently, just whenever you have time, even though it might make you feel silly, just record into your phone. And eventually you might want to start just a show with a topic in mind. Maybe say, you know what, I'm going to do 5 episodes on what's this show that everyone's talking about? Severance. Have you been watching that show, Severance, on Apple TV? No. It's really messing with my mind. But people are excited about it. So if you're excited about a show you're watching or something else, say, okay, I'm going to do 5 episodes on this thing and see how that goes. There's some fairly inexpensive microphones you can get. There's the Samson Q2U that in most markets is around, it's less than $100 US. So you could get started fairly inexpensively, just plug it into your computer and start recording. And one of the reasons on Transistor, you can have as many shows as you want. So even on the starter plan, we don't charge you for starting additional shows.
Nice.
And the reason was I started podcasting and I was just experimenting. And I think the best way to get better is just to start multiple shows, different formats, different genres, different topics, all that stuff. And it's going to take some practice. The first thing you put out, you're not going to sound like Ira Glass, you know?
Yeah, that's for sure.
And it takes practice. And, you know, I've been podcasting since 2012 now. If you listen to me on the show, I still have so much to learn. I still need to take it more seriously. I still need to practice better microphone technique. I still need to get my sound stuff dialed in better. I still need to have less likes, you know, like and uhs and ums and all those things.
But you're doing it.
Always get better.
Yeah.
But the practice is helpful. I think one thing that I have been able to practice, and part of this is just going to be who you are as a person, is some people just have a knack for being interesting on the mic, and some people don't. And if you are one of those people that can do it or has the desire to get better at it, then good, you're in. Keep going. But it's not for everybody. And you really do need to figure out a way eventually, if you want to have a serious show with, you know, and grow the number of listeners you have, if you want to attract more listeners, you have to figure out a way to become compelling to all of those people. It's very much the same rules that apply to a product or a startup. The same principles that you apply to get listeners for a podcast are very similar to the principles you would apply for getting customers for a product. And
yeah, sorry, like based on you know, like the 20,000 podcasts that you guys are helping on Transistor, is there anything that you've seen people do where, you know, like they drive more reviews, more like I don't know, like subscribers, more like listeners? Have you like kind of like strategized it in a way where you have a playbook for that, or do you feel like it's mainly, I mean, obviously like the quality of the topic, the quality of the, you know, like the speaker, the interviewer, or if it's a solo podcast, like the person itself and the topics. But I do feel like distribution in any channel is also like you need to put your podcast in front of others. So have you like spotted some approaches that worked like really well?
Yeah. I mean, the first thing is going to be the topic you choose and how many people are already in motion seeking out that thing. So some people just want to listen to the funniest comedy podcasts. What are they searching for? They're searching for best comedy podcasts. Or when they are with a group of friends, they're saying, hey, what comedy podcasts are you listening to? That's how recommendations work. And that's how search intent works. And so there's a lot of people in motion looking for comedy podcasts. the challenge is there's also lots of competition. And the people that are in motion, they're not just looking for comedy podcasts. Many of them are looking for names they recognize in comedy, right? And so let's just use comedy as an example. If I was going to launch a comedy podcast, it would have to be, I think, either one of two ways. It would either have to be kind of maybe a solo show or a show that I'm doing with a few regulars where people really fall in love with us as hosts. And maybe we have a unique sense of humor. Maybe they just start to love our inside jokes. And that show would grow slower than another way you could do it, which would be to basically try to get the most famous people on the show as possible. So we have seen, like on Transistor, people who are able to get guests who have a big audience, they do grow their show faster.
Okay.
Because those guests can, not always, but they can drive a lot of listens. Especially if people are looking for more. When I was getting started in startups, I was anything by Jason Fried of 37 Signals, I would read and I would try to find. And once I started listening to podcasts, I would specifically look for him as a guest. I would just search for Jason Fried and I would find every podcast he'd been on.
That's interesting.
And I think people do seek out, interviews like that. So two approaches, but the topic you choose is going to matter a lot. How many people are already in motion looking for that thing? And I think people don't think about this stage enough because it really is going to, in a lot of my writing, I talk about riding a wave, and the size and shape of the wave really does determine how you're going to ride it and how far you're going to go and how much momentum is going to be there, right? And so I think people really need to consider what is the category or the market or the topic that I'm going into. And given that market, given the size and the shape and the dynamics of that category, what can I do to be compelling? What can I do to get this huge amount of momentum? People are searching for information on startups. Well, what can I do to ride that wave in a way that will attract some of that existing momentum? You're trying to channel existing momentum. And I think the mistake that people make is they're trying to create momentum when it's not there. So there's an old South by Southwest panel that still gets quoted today. And the topic was blogging and how to attract, blog readers and things. And the advice back then was to niche down topic wise until you get to the most specific thing you can. And so don't just talk about Star Wars, talk about that one Jawa in that one episode or that one film. And I just think that's bad advice because there has to be enough momentum. People have to be searching. Yeah. Like how many people are searching for that one Jawa? Like you're trying to create a fandom where it's not there. Mm. So sure, have a Star Wars podcast. But then you're going to have to figure out how you can be compelling. And obviously there's tons and tons of Star Wars podcasts. How are you going to be compelling? But what's nice about that topic is people are searching for it already. They're already in motion. That's how people need to be thinking.
I'm not like super familiar with it, but I assume it might exist. Like, do you have like the equivalent of like Ahref or any like SEO tools, but for podcast, so you can know a bit in advance like what people are looking for on the App Store or like on the Apple Podcast? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few ways you can do this research. So certainly you could go to Chartable, which tracks, you can search for most podcasts and see where it is on the charts and whether it's going up or down. You can also go to communities where people recommend episodes. So there's Podchaser and Podacy are two of those. Recommendations is quite important because if people are recommending something, it means it's been compelling for them. And then there's also, you can also just search, if you go into the Apple Podcast Store or the Spotify Podcast Store and put any keyword in there. So if you put parenting, you're going to, the initial search results are all going to be ranked by popularity. And you can then start to figure out why is this show popular? What's making this show popular? Why are people recommending it? And then you can also use traditional SEO tools. So you could use Ahrefs and you could put in, for example, their website URL and see who's linking to them and what keywords people are using to find that website. So there, traditional SEO tools could actually help you as well.
Okay.
What keywords are people using to find this podcast? And then there's one more I would recommend, which is SparkToro. And it's like a social search engine. And what I find interesting about that one is you could put in, for example, Ira Glass, like go search for him, and then it will show you what his followers are into. So people who follow Ira Glass also follow this person. They also read these blogs and they also listen to these podcasts.
Oh, that's interesting.
And one more trick is in Apple Podcasts, if you find a show, you can scroll to the bottom and there's a section called people who listen to this also
listen to. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you can see kind of what adjacent shows people are listening to.
Because the idea for you here would be, for example, like let's say you spot 5 to 10 people in your niche who are doing like similar shows, or at least like shows who address like a similar audience. Then you would try to understand like what are like the hot topics or what are like the most listened episode they've done. And then you would try to do it like your way, but potentially on similar topics or with similar guests. Is that like the idea or behind it?
Yeah, you would take some of that and you would go, so for example, let's just switch to products for a second. Podcast hosting has been around for a long time. There was lots of other entrants. And so when Transistor showed up, we had to, in some ways, have similar features to the competitors, right? We had to reach a certain amount of feature parity, but then we also had to figure out a way of distinguishing ourselves from those competitors. And so we did that partly with positioning. We were one of the first hosting providers to do multiple podcasts for one price. You can start as many podcasts as you want on Transistor for one price. And that became a compelling reason to check us out. Mm-hmm. But there's also other things as well that became compelling about us. Our brand of sharing our story and just who John and I are as people, and the audience I built for years, that also became part of the reason people might switch and check us out. And then the other thing is that we were just the fresh face. We were the new kid on the block. And some topics in podcasting and some categories in products, they've just had a bunch of people who've been doing it forever, and people are just ready for something new, something fresh. So even if This American Life and Ira Glass have been around forever, people sometimes get tired of listening to Ira, and they're like, I'd like something like that, but fresh.
But different. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it doesn't even need to be that different. It just needs to be new, right? I think there's lots of opportunities, both in products and podcasts, where people go, someone's been doing that show forever, or that kind of show forever. But just by coming in and being a fresh face, that might be enough on its own for people to check you out. So there has to be something compelling. And I hope the picture I'm painting here is showing folks that really all of this is circumstantial. like this is part of what makes starting something and creating something so fun, is that I can give you the surface area of advice. I can give you the boundaries. I can kind of briefly sketch out the shape of what you should be looking for, and maybe even give you some specific tactics. But at the end of the day, what you and everybody else has to do in order to stand out is you have to figure out, given my strengths, my aptitudes, my connections, my experiences, everything I have at my disposal, and given what I have observed and learned, how can I now make this more compelling? How can I now make this more interesting? How can I give people a reason to switch from that podcast to mine, from that product to mine? And that's where the creativity comes in. That's part of the fun part, is you find yourself in a unique situation because only you are you, and only you have the experiences, connections, resources that you have. So given all of that, what can you do? And, there's some general principles that you can follow, but most of it is going to be you figuring out how to navigate it and just keeping the principles in mind. So always asking yourself, okay, well, if this podcast is in my category and they're popular and they're doing that thing, what can I do that's maybe different, that might be interesting to a section of that audience? Maybe I don't even want their audience. Maybe their audience is old and I want to go after Gen Z. So how can I now be applicable to people who are in college? There's all of these kinds of questions and positioning that you can do to attract an audience or to attract customers. So I'm not sure if that makes sense, but those
definitely
are the kinds of things I think about.
And I think like what you mentioned about, the importance of your personality, the fact that in the end, it's your story. So people are going to follow you as a person. And I think it's like a kind of a smooth transition, because you also mentioned it a bit, you built like a strong audience on Twitter. You've been like building public, documenting. So I'm curious to go back a bit, like to, transistor.fm, like growth and different acquisition channel that you might have used that have worked like really well. So how big would you say like the impact of creating your own podcast, documenting and building an audience helped you achieve what you've achieved so far with the company?
Yeah, so all of that stuff is building an audience, building in public. It can amplify or magnify your other efforts. Mm-hmm. And so the interplay between all of these things is sometimes challenging to articulate. But at the beginning, it was very helpful because, one, I knew a bunch of people. Even before we had told anybody, I knew 40 people probably that had a podcast. And so part of our initial, our early access users was me reaching out to people individually saying, hey, I know you've been on Libsyn forever. Would you switch from Libsyn to Transistor? And I'll give you a little bit of a deal because we're still building it. And I was able to convince, eventually, 20, 30, 40 people to do that. And then we announced it publicly that we were working on it. And maybe we got another 100 users from our audience and our network once we announced it publicly. So getting our first couple hundred users, it was definitely helpful. But now we have thousands of customers. And there's a bunch of things that have helped. One, again, we were the fresh product. So a lot of people were already in motion, looking for something new. something simple, something with we were product people. This was one of our skill sets. One of our advantages is we didn't come from the podcast industry. We came from the tech industry. We knew how to build good products. And so that became a growth lever because people were like looking for a simpler, better, faster product to use. We've also, a lot of our inbound traffic comes from search.
Okay.
And this is why I often talk about the market and people in motion, because every single day around the world, thousands of people are searching how to start a podcast. Mm-hmm. Or once they know, more about it, they know they need podcast hosting. And so they search best podcast hosting or podcast hosting sites or podcast hosting, whatever.
Justin Jackson.
Well, that's the thing. Podcast hosting searches far eclipse anyone searching for me, right? And so it can help. And you see the interplay between these. Once you start having customers, I recommend that you send an automated email. So as soon as people sign up, I send them an automated email that just says, hey, what is going on in your life that brought you here today? Why are you here? And they might say, well, I was just searching for best podcast hosting. I found this review site. You were listed. I checked you out and it seemed great. So I signed up. But then you also see everything else like, oh, Justin, I've been following your journey forever. I've been reading your blog since 2008. And then I was a product people listener. And then I saw you speak at this conference. And then yesterday, my boss asked if I knew how to sign up for podcast hosting. And I'm like, I instantly thought of you. So now I'm signing up for my boss, right? So everything you do can be an amplifier or a magnifier of everything else. But SEO has been big for us, search engine optimization. And then in conjunction with that, I'm not going to own best podcast hosting sites. There's some people who are very good at SEO that make a whole living just having reviews of the best podcast hosting sites, best microphones, best, whatever. And we have affiliate relationships with them. So every time someone goes to their site and then signs up for Transistor, we share 25% of revenue ongoing with them.
For life? Is it like for life or?
For life, yeah. Mm-hmm. At least for now. I mean, we have no plans of changing it, but we've noticed a lot of other people in our space have changed their affiliate programs lately. But right now, for us, it seems like such a great deal because as opposed to advertising where you're putting the money up front, just hoping it translates into something, affiliates only get paid when somebody pays us. Yeah. And if that customer cancels, then we no longer pay. If that customer stays for years, then we both benefit. And so for us, that partnership has always felt like a good deal. It's win-win for both parties. And one of our values is empowering indie businesses and indie creators. And most of our affiliates are just indie businesses. They're, one guy has a ranch and he's just like you and I, So
I think affiliate, I used to really like, I sort of it as something, like very beneficial, a win-win situation until I realized that, because we had launched initially like an affiliate program and then we stopped it because we had people where actually like, we don't do any ads. So no AdWords, nothing on this. So the guy created an affiliate account and then he was betting on our own name on AdWords. So he was basically like stealing our organic traffic and started making sign up. And when our growth started to like really skyrocket, this guy started to make more and more money. And then I was like, yeah, maybe it's him, like he's just driving so much traffic. So I wanted to meet him. The guy was never answering. And then down the line, I was in Sri Lanka. I checked like Lemlist. And then I saw like an ad and I was like, this is weird. I clicked on it and it was driving to our website. I was like, this is definitely weird. Then I checked the URL and I saw like the fucking affiliate link and I was like, oh, you smart motherfucker.
And we have to deal with a little bit of that.
Yeah. Have you found like a lot of people abusing it or more?
No, we have
mainly fair. Okay.
I think we have like maybe probably around 800, 900 affiliates.
Wow, that's
and,
big.
Now the top 5 to 10 of those drive like 90% of the business.
Oh, okay.
And we've had, I think I've only canceled 2 people's affiliate accounts. One for betting on ads on DuckDuckGo, funny enough. And
how did you figure out that it was doing that on DuckDuckGo? Just
one day I was searching for it, and then I was like, "Oh, weird! There's an ad here." And then I realized it was. I think DuckDuckGo ads are from Bing, and so.
Oh, okay.
I eventually. I mean, his referral URL was right there, so I could easily figure out. Who
you spot who that was, and
yeah, and so that was easy to shut down. And I mean, he made a little bit of money, but definitely the people who are making the most money are folks who have spent years and years and years building
strong SEO brand, and they have like so much traffic, and yeah.
And so we get a lot of traffic from that. That's probably a quarter of our revenue comes from affiliates, I'd say.
Nice.
And then there's just a whole branded side, which is, especially in startups, people love attribution. They want everything, all traffic to be attributable
the source
to something.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I've been doing product marketing now for over 10 years. And I have become less and less attribution is something I trust less and less. It's just very difficult to really figure out where people are coming from.
Even with ads, actually. Yeah.
Even with ads.
Yeah, I agree.
And the only way to really do this is to ask people when they sign up how they found you. That's, at the end of the day, that's the only surefire way. And even then, they could remember.
I thought so too, and I had asked like someone like, how exactly did you find us? And then they're like, oh, I saw an ad on Facebook, and I'm like, yeah, we don't run ads, but thanks. But I agree with you. Like attribution is, I think, if you want to do it right, also like you have to spend so much money on trying to create like an attribution like model, etc. Then you're not 100% sure, and yeah, I'm on the same page with it.
I mean, the more you dig into it, I worked for a startup one time where we had to report our KPIs, key performance indicators, every month in a Google spreadsheet. And so every month I have like 20 things I've got to report on. How much traffic are we getting? How many trials, visitor to trial conversion, trial to paid? How many social media posts did we post? How many blog posts did we post? All this stuff. And all of these numbers that I'm plugging into this Google spreadsheet have assumptions baked in. I'm getting those numbers from somewhere. And some of this stuff is stuff I've set up, and some of this stuff is stuff other people have set up. So, we have a Mixpanel tracking script that's tracking things from here. And then I have a Google funnel that I'm tracking all this stuff. I eventually figured out that the way we were tracking, the way we had set up one of those things, a Mixpanel funnel or a Google Analytics funnel, was wrong. We were incorrectly attributing certain data. And I fixed it, but then instantly, every number I had been reporting on for the past 6 months was wrong. We had made decisions on those numbers.
Yeah.
And it's the more you dig, and now I've since done, before Transistor, I was doing consulting, and I would go into people's, analytics, and it's just like the assumptions they're making. This data is dirty. It is so dirty. even, controlling for bots alone is very difficult. And if you're putting a lot of stock, especially in your visitor to trial conversion rate, if Google Analytics is misreading that, which they do all the time, they revise their own algorithm all the time, that number will be wildly different. If all of a sudden they determine that 3,000 of your visitors were actually bots, and then they fix their algorithm, all of a sudden any assumptions you've made on that data are now incorrect.
And I think it goes back also to what you were saying earlier with the importance of asking yourself like the right questions. Because again, like if you are spending tons of money on attribution, data, etc., and the data is incorrect, and you're taking like shitty decisions that are not like business minded. Like, okay, is this bringing value to my users? Am I aligned with the brand I want to build? And all these things, that can drive value. I think I've seen so many companies taking like so much like shitty decision based on the inaccurate data, and then moving forward, even though it's totally like counterintuitive on the business side.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously some data is important. At Transistor, I really only track a few things. I track trial to paid, which is quite easy for us because we ask for a credit card up front.
Okay.
And
nice.
and this is actually an important principle, I think. When you can, simplifying your whole setup is better. This is another reason I don't like the startup addiction to marketing attribution and marketing automation and all of this magic that you just keep stacking the complexity one on top of the other. This thing fires this thing, and then this does this, and then this tracks this. And
on paper, it's nice, but yeah.
What's that?
I say on paper, like people love it because it looks super complex. It looks like super smart to have like tons of integration and triggers. But again, it's not driving business.
It's like steroids. It's like you're trying to pump up something, but it's all artificial.
Yeah.
And it would be better to go after a market with strong demand where there's lots of people in motion already. And in our case, we've just added more friction to the first part, which is to sign up for a Transistor free trial, you need a credit card.
Mm.
And so, we get a lot less free trials because of that.
But more conversion.
But everything else is simple. And it's in our values. We've written these down. We want to simplify our lives. I don't want a whole machine running all the time that I constantly have to maintain, that I'm constantly worried about. I want to be able to, if I want to go to work one day and then just feel like going to the cafe and hanging out with friends for most of the day, I want to be able to do that without feeling like the whole thing is going to fall apart. And simplicity is the way you do that.
Yeah,
and so visitor to trial, our trial to paid conversion rate is a steady 75%. So we know if we get more trials, we're going to make more money, as long as that stays roughly around 75%. It just simplifies everything. What's the one metric we need to increase? Trials. Yeah. That's it. And then there's other things we could do to keep people longer, right? But we're doing
or increase conversion rates. But
yeah. I think there's definitely some things we could do, but even increasing conversion rates, at the end of the day, I mostly care about the absolute number. Mm. If we had 400 trials last month, but this month we have 600 trials, that's just better.
Yeah.
Now, the conversion rate from visitor to trial may have gone up or down, but that's because you've got this bogus number at the beginning, which is top of funnel. It's like, how many visitors did you have? Well, maybe, we have an article that mentions Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan was in the news. And so now people are searching for Joe Rogan, but all of those visitors are garbage. It doesn't matter. So our conversion rate goes down. But maybe at the same time, we did a promotion where you get a free microphone with every new account. And we signed up more trials, but our conversion rate from visitor to trial actually went down because these two things happened at the same time. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely.
So there's optimizations you can do, but I think a lot of it will be more qualitative. Like signing up for your own app every once in a while will give you most of that information.
Yeah, that's
or
true.
Watching somebody else sign up for your app, or live streaming you signing up for your app and getting people to mention the things that are confusing to them. So I think there's other ways to get that information, but qualitatively, in a way where you're observing, oh man, like that button really doesn't make that much sense. I can see it clearly now that I'm in this frame of mind of like, I'm searching for best podcast hosting and then I find Transistor, but then I land here, there's a disconnect. I've got to fix that, So yeah, we track trial to paid, number of trials, MRR, churn, and number of support tickets, because often support is a leading indicator that we're going to get more business. Because really support is also like internal sales, It's like people are landing and asking questions. And so if we get a bunch more support tickets, often that means that we could get more leads.
Nice.
And the conversations we have with those people also give us information. Hey, curious, how did you hear about us? And they'll say, oh, I was looking at this and this, and interesting. And what other things are you evaluating? And kind of how are you evaluating Transistor versus the competition? And they might say, well, I've noticed this other place has really nice built-in websites, and that's really interesting to me. So we know which levers to pull when we're talking to customers. I'm a big fan of live chat. A lot of smaller startups don't do live chat because it's
people see it as a sunk cost, but I think it's like such a huge opportunity. And like the margin on SaaS are like so big that down the line, even though you invest heavily in support, like for us, I think our support department is almost like the biggest department in the team. But like most people could tell you like, yeah, like why are you doing this? It's a self-service product, like you don't need like that much support, etc. But the truth is like all this conversation creates like a relationship, and the relationship makes people stay longer, talk about you, and this is like a real investment for your growth. Yeah,
it's you said it perfectly. I couldn't agree more. I think it's so important. We were able to do it as a 2-person company, and then eventually we hired Helen, nice. Who basically covers a big portion of the day, especially when we're sleeping. And I think we could add one more person in North America to cover it, but we haven't found it overwhelming. Now, It'll depend on your category.
Yeah.
Like I think last week we had total tickets was under 100.
Wow.
So it's not, we're not getting,
but you have like a very like straightforward and easy product. Like
in some ways there's also, we do a lot of support for Apple and Spotify and all of the, how come my episode's not in Spotify? How come my podcast cover art isn't showing up? So there, podcasting is messy in a way because it's not a straight line like YouTube where they handle everything. You have to upload your episode to Transistor, and then we are then syndicating that out via RSS to all of the platforms.
Yeah.
So that mess does create more support. But compared to some other products, we definitely have less support than those. And there's things we can do in the product to lessen that. Because I would love to have more inbound people on live chat. Those are the best. But if we can make the product simpler to use, so people don't have to ask as many questions, then that's better. So in some ways, I almost think of support more like sales. It's like people are coming and we're answering their questions. people get a kick out of it. Like John and I answer questions on support and they can't believe they've got the owners of the company.
That's
but
nice.
we love it. You get so much information.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I'm curious, like last growth question, I would say, like before we wrap this up with 3 fire question.
Yeah, sure.
Have you, like, I was curious about it because obviously like podcasting and being on podcast as guest is actually also a great way to kind of like grow your audience and drive more traffic. So I'm curious, you have an audience, you are someone that, like does well on interview. You also did a podcast and you have like a tool that helps like people hosting, publishing their podcasts. So I'm curious, like, have you ever thought of reaching out, to every person who's doing like a podcast and that could have like a relevant audience and say, you know what, like, you're using my tool. I'm actually the CEO. Would love to chat like on your podcast. Like, would that make sense? And just like trying this approach because,
Yeah, totally. No, that's a great idea. I mean, I do whenever I can, I go on customers' podcasts. And there's a balance there because I still want to have a good life. And one of the features of a good life for me is having as few meetings as possible in a week. And so like this week, I've got 2. I've got a staff meeting and I've got this interview with you. Last week, I had another interview. So like doing 1 or 2 interviews a week is
max.
Really fun for me. I actually really like it.
Okay.
But if I did it too much, I would probably not like it.
Okay.
But yeah, it is. You're right. That one of the nice things about it is that when I go on a customer's podcast, a lot of those listeners may have also thought about starting a podcast.
Yeah.
And so it becomes this built-in kind of form of native advertising where you're like, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna check this person out. It's also, I mean, the other nice thing about podcasting is the personal connection. And so, I'm this way too. If I know somebody's story or I strongly resonate with who they are, I'm more likely to sign up for their product. Not always, it has to be something I'm already in motion, but like we recently switched from Calendly to SavvyCal, almost entirely because of Derek Reimer. Now, Derek's a great product person. I think SavvyCal is a better product, but the switch was easier because I was like, we got to support Derek. We know his story. We've been following him forever. Yeah. Similar with Brian Casel. We switched from Loom to ZipMessage. And it's interesting. I wanted to support Brian. So that was my big job to be done. But then I have to convince John, my partner. And in that case, it was ZipMessage is currently cheaper than Loom. So it was an easy way to say, hey, John, can we switch? And he's like, well,
money?
Why? And I'm like, well, we'll save money. He's like, sure. It just became an easy sell,
Nice.
And I think as a growth lever, that's also underrated. There's a real charge more cult in especially the bootstrap world. And at the beginning, when you're building trust, I think it's okay not to discount your product down to super cheap, but it's okay to be one of the more affordable options. Yeah. And again, Crisp, who we were talking about earlier, has benefited from this massively. They get a huge amount of goodwill because they've made their product affordable. And I talk about it all the time just because it's the more affordable option. People are like, I just got a new bill from Intercom. It's $3,000. And I'm like, well, we pay $99 a month for Crisp. And they're like, what? So that I think there is a lever to pull there where you can get more growth from sometimes lowering your prices, which people don't talk about, or having a lower price than the competition. And maybe you can make it up in volume, right?
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, I think it's Marta who was on the podcast also, like she grew Flowdesk, her company, email marketing, and they have exactly like this strategy. So penetration pricing, super low, unlimited, etc. And they grew like, I think it's 3 years to like 15 million in ARR bootstrapped. It's crazy. Yeah, it's just crazy. And yeah,
well, I got to listen to that episode because that's a drum I've been beating lately, because I think we can get so stuck in cliches. And it's why when I talk about building a business or building a podcast or whatever, any sort of advice, I try to make it as nuanced as possible, because these general, broad, blunt cliches, I actually think can do more damage than good. And you really need to evaluate, again, who you are with respect to the market and where the market is. Even her story. So she was able to grow to 50 million ARR. A lot of that is the market.
Yeah.
She's riding the wave. But if she's on a surfboard in a pond in the middle of, a landlocked area, there's no waves there. No amount of skill is going to help her to ride that wave better. But if she sees this massive wave going, that's where the strategy comes in. And part of her strategy is she's saying, I'm going to ride out to that wave. I'm going to paddle out to that wave. The technique in which I'm going to ride that wave is to lower my prices, because look at all of this momentum. If I can capture more of this momentum, that will turn into more growth. That'll turn into more revenue. Whereas podcast hosting, I could apply the same techniques, but our market has a ceiling. The wave is only going to get so big. So even if I used all of her techniques exactly, even if she came and was CEO of Transistor, I mean, it's possible she could grow. I don't want to say that's not possible, but we are always going to be anchored to the market. How big is this market going to grow? Well, it's as big as the wave is, right? We don't really control that. That's out of our hands. So really thinking about the market and you in relationship to the market and the markets you enter, John and I are going to be happy. If Transistor gets to $5 million ARR, we will be happy. That's fine for us. But if you want to grow a business to 100 million ARR, don't go into podcast hosting because it's tiny. You could probably get there if you went into WordPress hosting, because WordPress hosting is a magnitude larger. The market you choose really matters. And then the techniques you apply on top of that market will determine some of your success.
Agree. It was like a really cool and insightful chat. I always wrap up the podcast with 3 fire questions. First one, what's your favorite podcast?
Oh, I mean, there's so many. I really like this genre of two bootstrappers talking to each other. And so like John and I have one like that, but there's Bootstrapped Web, there's Art of Product, there's Software Social, there's Bootstrapping SaaS. I listen to all of them. There's Slow and Steady, there's Indie Bytes. I listen to all of them. I just had a really good conversation. You right now have the list of
all my competitors for our listeners. So go ahead and let's share some love to other bootstrappers.
I mean, the nice thing about that category is that a lot of us listen to all the shows, you know. I listen to Indie Hackers. Because that for me is connection. It's like I'm walking down to my office every day, 25-minute walk from my house up at the top of the hill downtown to get a coffee and then come to my office. And I'm listening. I'm just listening all the time. Sometimes I don't listen to the whole thing, but I'm just checking in. Like, how's Benedicta doing? How is Michelle doing on Software Social? I want to know, I think for you, by the way, going back, the opportunity for you is to figure out who your listeners are and which parts of your audience you can amplify. And
who are you guys or girls? Tell us.
And to figure out which area to go to, I would be asking what other podcasts they listen to. And for example, I'm going to make an assumption, but it could be wrong. Don't crucify me for this. But there's another French person who does a podcast called Everyone Hates Marketing.
Mm.
And I would be curious if people who listen to his show also listen to your show. If that's true, a cross promotion would be a good way to grow your audience. Because if, again, maybe people appreciate your European sensibility. Maybe people appreciate your European point of view. Maybe people appreciate if entrepreneurship and startups are going in France, maybe more people want to hear that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would be thinking about that. There might be opportunity for cross promotion.
Interesting.
Sorry, these are not rapid fire questions.
You're not listening to me, Justin.
Sorry, I'm being a bad guest.
It's fine. Our tagline is do what you shouldn't. So all good.
Oh, there we go. Great.
Second fire question is, who's your favorite bootstrap entrepreneur?
Oh, Jesus. I mean, what got me into this was Jason Fried, Derek Sivers, Jason Cohen, Patio 11, Rob Walling, a lot of those old timers, I guess.
Nice.
And I still think there's lots we can get from them. I think Derek Sivers, if people aren't reading Derek Sivers, they should. A lot of people don't know about him anymore, but he's just fantastic. Like, definitely read all of his books. They're great.
Nice.
And then there's lots of young people that get me excited too, or even people who aren't young and are just getting into it. I always get a little bit excited because I started so late comparatively. Like, I didn't really get into tech until my late 20s. And, I was building Transistor at 38. I always get excited when folks who are in their late 30s and 40s are building businesses. So there's, I can't remember his name, but he has a podcast called Audience Explorer. And, I think he's in his 60s, German fellow. And I love watching those people build businesses too, because
nice.
There's just something about it that makes me want to cheer for them.
Oh, that's cool. I like I vibe for other people like this too. I think it's really nice. And the last question is, what do you do during tough times to kind of like regain energy?
Oh, for sure. Even in non-tough times, I go to therapy once a month.
Okay.
And that started when I had a really rough couple years, not even related to business. It was, stuff in my personal life. But I think, especially on the internet, and especially in startups and bootstrapping and all that, we're very good at hiding behind our businesses and what we're doing, or how many people are following us on Twitter or whatever else. But the truth is, we are all human. And for me personally, I avoided going to therapy for a long, long time. And I wish I had started earlier. And I had every excuse in the book for not doing it. Mostly because I think it would have just been embarrassing. Like, it would be embarrassing to I search for somebody on Google, like therapists near me. And then I show up and I wait in a waiting room, and then I talk to somebody. Like, it just, the whole idea, I came from a pretty conservative family background. It was like, I am not doing that. But when I was forced to, because I was so depressed, it has become one of the most life-giving practices I have. And now I do it. And, there's a lot of time where things aren't terrible, but I almost always have something to talk about.
Nice.
It's everything I can't talk about here, I can talk about there. And that is incredibly life-giving and has been very, very helpful for me in my personal life and my business life, which is actually just life. The whole of that is life. And learning to recognize the interaction between those things is very important. All of us have a real life, and we have we love people and we get our heart broken and we have anxiety and we have fears and, all of those things are important, and all of the things in our personal life do affect our business life as well. So yeah, I would say therapy has been massive for me. I had to try 3 or 4 people before I found someone really good.
Nice.
And now I just go see her every month, and it really fires me up. Like I get out of a session and I feel renewed.
That's really awesome. Yeah, I do think I agree with you about like this thing about what people perceive as therapy, because everyone thinks it's, you have to be kind of sick, or, like the entire process is stressful. But again, I think like, talking to someone, like trying to figure out things, getting the person asking you the right questions and having this safe place is just like, is just awesome. So thanks a lot for sharing this.
Yeah. Thanks. It was great to be here. Yeah. Let's call me back tomorrow and we'll do the whole thing in French.
Get ready for our French audience. Where can people like follow you or like get updates on what you're doing?
Oh, sure. JustinJackson.ca is where I write. On Twitter, I'm MI Justin, the letter M, the letter I, Justin. And then if they want to sign up for podcast hosting, it's transistor.fm.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Justin. It was awesome having you on the podcast.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Bootstrap Stories, the only podcast where bootstrap entrepreneurs share their journey in all transparency. If you enjoyed this episode, don't hesitate to leave us a review. And in case you want to see the interview, all episodes are live on the YouTube channel. Check out the link in the description and hit subscribe if you haven't already. Have an amazing day, and make sure to also join us in our amazing Bootstrap community where we all helped each other to become successful and grow a profitable business. Take care and talk to you soon.